Markets Now is brought to you by the 5-year anniversary of Brevant Seeds. Here's to 5 years of not just winning, but collecting one game-changing W after another. See all of our wins at Brevant.com/wins.
Welcome to Markets Now. I'm Rochelle Rook with Chuck Shelby of Risk Management Commodities. We saw a lot of green on the board today with the exception of slight losses in soybeans and live cattle futures. Let's start off talking about the greens. First of all, greens in sum total felt like after a big update yesterday, the market maybe is starting to turn its attention towards the reports coming up on Friday and maybe a little squaring ahead of that.
Yeah, it was a pretty calm day compared to some previous days. Kind of taking a breather. We did close in positive territory for the most part. The beans came out of their lows. So I think going forward, we got Friday's big report. Certainly probably will be an impact on the market, although it'll be interesting to see what USDA comes up with after, having limited staff and they are going to give us a report. So interesting. Folks are kind of lining up here. And I think there's some reasons to maybe see some new data that we hadn't seen for a while.
Well, in the case of the corn, did we get a little bit of a push today as we had average trade guess on yield come down to about 184 bushels per acre? So down, 2.7 from September. So was that a little positive?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, the crop is still, a very big crop. And I think, there are some states and some areas around the country that had some great yields, but there's also, some of the disease and some of the other problems, dry weather here in the East, as we had the last 6-7 weeks going into harvest. So overall, trade's looking for a smaller number. That's again, how much data did USDA able to accumulate to come up with an answer? But I think if the market sees numbers relatively close to what they think, then we're going to move on to demand and exports and those kind of things. The end of harvest, maybe basis improving as we get past Friday's report.
184 national corn yield would still be a record, Chuck, but all of the states that had records projected for corn yield in the September report, boy, that seems to be out of the cards here, off the table, doesn't it?
Certainly the Illinois record yield, Indiana record yield, they're not on the table now. The question is, where does that average out? But I think overall, the yield's coming down and maybe even closer, our view is closer to 181, 182. Again, still a record yield on a lot of acres, still a lot of bushels out there. Positive note, the demand's been really good and the export's been really good. So that's something we need to find out from USDA also.
So those two things combined, can they get us under 2 billion bushels ending stocks on corn? Because right now the average trade guess is still above 2.1.
I think that's the wild card, or that would be the positive to the market. If we could bring the carryout down under 2 billion, I think the market would look at that as a very positive sign. Like I say, interesting here in the East, our basis is starting to improve, even though, harvest is wound down for the most part. So, there's some important numbers out there.
Yeah. Meanwhile, we've been trading in a pretty narrow range here in corn, pretty range bound, right?
Yeah, back and forth. I'd like to see the March close over the 450 area. We punched up there multiple times and hadn't been able to close above there and break through. Technically, if you could do that, your 200-day moving average is right in that general area. So, if you could do that and find a reason to get above there, then you might trade between 450, 475, which would be, an opportunity maybe as we go forward for producers to make some more sales.
Soybeans, as you mentioned, we ended off the lows, but still a little bit lower for the day. That market feels like it's kind of consolidating under last week's highs, waiting for new information, right?
Yeah, and when you look at the bean yield, it's very important. When you look at the lower acres of planted beans from last year in 25, you take the yield down a bushel, it certainly has an impact. And then, the Chinese discussion and have they bought, will they buy, looking forward, that's a positive to the market. We're above $11. That's another positive. Technically, when you look at this market, we trade maybe between a range of 11 and 12 potentially. So, yeah, a lot of important news coming Friday. We just have to question, the accuracy of it, but that's what the market will trade, whatever they see Friday for a while.
All right, I'm going to bite on this. You've said it several times. We're worried about the accuracy of the reports on Friday. USDA said, hey, we're going to use the same methodology that we always use, but you are doubtful about that, right?
I work with some producers who are in the, survey this year, and some of them just got that in the mail yesterday. So obviously USDA sent it out, but they don't have time to get that back. So, in my mind, I somewhat have questions. I'm sure they got some of that information back, but is it wide ranging enough? That's a question I have in the back of my mind, and maybe on Friday it'll be accurate, but I have some questions when you don't get all the data that you really think you need to get back to give an accurate representation of the total yield.
Yeah. I also want to play devil's advocate with you for a moment because you talked about the China soybean demand or soybean purchases, and the market is still holding on to hope for that. But we haven't really seen any proof of more than a few cargoes of purchases. And this morning, I read a story that COPCO is signed an agreement with a bunch of Brazilian firms for 20 million metric tons of soybeans and product. Those things do not sound like we're in the bandwagon of buying U.S. beans.
Yeah, that's a problem, I think. I think, again, maybe the Chinese are looking at the potential, what the Supreme Court might say, whether that lasts 2 months before we get a decision or not. But if you're the Chinese and the Supreme Court says, oh, tariffs aren't, legitimate and Trump can't really do that. So potentially the Chinese have made a deal, but they're just going to take a wait and see attitude. But you sure would like to see those purchases come here. But so far, no confirmation. But again, the markets goes back and forth on every little story and news story. And, that's one of those that isn't really positive for us at the moment.
No, and we were supposed to sign the deal last week, but that didn't happen either, did it?
No, the uncertainty is frustrating to producers here. I think the potential is there. That's what the market's looking ahead to. That something good will happen. And when you look at the amount of beans the Chinese have bought from South America, anything they would buy from us going forward would be a positive. But at this point, again, still too much uncertainty. But as producers and being hopeful that we can get something going here as we move forward into 26.
So the wheat market has also rallied off 5-year lows here, in part because of hopes of China business, but we've had a lot of fund short covering. Are we going to take the next leg higher here, you think, or are we kind of close to running out of gas there?
Well, that brings up an interesting point. Without the USDA, we really don't know where the funds are positioned. I think another thing, when you look at the prices of corn, beans, and wheat, these are historically low prices when you take inflation into account. If you were a fund and, we've seen these big dramatic drop in grain prices, how much more meat on the bone is there for a fund to be selling these commodities at these prices with the potential for going forward with some Chinese deals, some Chinese purchases? So, I think the funds have probably been kind of moving away from the market. And I think, the next potential movement for the funds in my mind would be come back in and buy commodities. They just need some reason to do that. And potentially maybe China, it could be weathers. There's a lot of things that could trigger them to be buyers from these price levels.
For sure. Cattle market, we ended after limited moves yesterday, lower in live cattle, higher in the feeder cattle. But is that market, is it trying to find a low here?
It's one of those news-driven, crazy headline story every day. And I think it showed, the impact of the fund money that was, in the cattle markets. We talked about that lots of times, of the impact of fund money. It's great when you're in there and they push the market higher, but you can see the impact of them coming out of it. I think at this point, though, it goes back to the cash price. We've seen the cash price drop back from 248, 250 down into the 228, 230 range. I think that's where the futures market's going to trade and kind of stabilize here, and we go back to the basic fundamentals. Feeder cattle market, a little bit different. Feeder cattle market's still extremely strong. You got a November contract that goes off towards the end of the month here. So I think the feeders probably have a better case here. What I've heard from the guys that are out there looking for feeders, there's still a very strong market. And so it's got the funds out, then that was great for a while, but sure did lead to some volatility in the last 10 days.
So you feel like we're going to get back to trading the fundamentals then finally?
I guess I believe as we move past Thanksgiving, we get towards the Christmas holiday. Christmas hams are featured. Beef demand should come back around. So I look for a cash market to strengthen up after a Thanksgiving holiday, and the volatility is gone away here, and things are calming down. So we get back to the fundamentals of where's the cash market, and that leads us going forward at the end of the year.
Right. Hog market obviously is somewhat tied to what cattle do, but we've had a couple of good days now. Is that market also trying to bottom?
Yeah, just massive volatility, massive break there. And again, to build a base takes a little bit of time after you go through these big moves and gyrations and news headlines and things. So a stability, I think, is going to kind of go into the next 2 weeks here before the Thanksgiving holiday. And again, I look for things to be more calm as we move in December, and look for a market to see some increased cash prices, as I think we got some good demand for the Christmas holiday coming.
Very good. Thanks so much for joining us, Chuck Shelby, Risk Management Commodities. That is Markets Now.
When you choose Brevant Seeds, you don't just win. You win so big, the very ground beneath your feet cries tears of joy. You win so big that second place feels like a participation trophy. You win so big, you might as well be harvesting buried treasure. Oh, sorry, just one more. When you choose Brevant Seeds, you don't just win. You hit the damn jackpot. Don't just win, win. Talk with your retailer or visit Brevant.com/jackpot to get started.